Club. We're still at the popcorn counter, having not managed to make it see the film this time, because we have still got Mike Primmer with us. After having had a chat last week about recording for mainstream Hollywood cinema, we've actually spent the whole week sitting at the popcorn counter because this is your favourite food. Is that right? This is what you just told me a minute ago.
I love popcorn. It's my favorite snack.
This is why it's a man's born to the film industry.
Yes.
That's right, yeah. I
And
think
in
he's
fact,
just here for the popcorn.
I love it so much that I usually make my own and bring it into the cinema inside my jacket.
Is that allowed?
Yeah,
Now I'm picturing like deep secret pockets.
You know, it's twofold. It's the thrifty Yankee in me, but it's also like taste.
Yeah.
I prefer my own popcorn to the cinema, much to my family's chagrin, because they prefer the buttery deliciousness. But
That ain't butter.
Think how much money you've saved, though. Now, so wait a second. Now, so you two guys worked together on a film 25 years ago, which is part of the reason why we arranged to meet here in the first place at all. So I know I have watched this film. I've seen it for the first time last week. Tell me a bit more, Andres. What is the film that you two made together?
So this is the 25th, did I say that properly? 25th anniversary of Debutante, the coming out of Stephen Ray Liedlich, which was a mockumentary, I guess. I think that's how you would characterize it now. I think we all loved Spinal Tap in 1984 or something like that when that came out, and that felt like one of the real first mockumentaries, and Christopher Guest's whole gang that he put together, and have done so many great mockumentaries since then. But 25 years ago, started shooting in 1997, and we made this film based on sort of the talents of a good friend of ours, Stephen Ray Liedlich, who was an upright guitarist. So for me, it works mostly as a documentary. I think it's actually a good documentary about him as a musician. And I think it really captures a lot of his music pretty well. And the sound is pretty good. I don't know that Mike, as a professional, would say the same thing, but and how much he played with the sound when we were editing it. But, you know, it was shot on SVHS, which was kind of the format at that time. And we were on another popcorn counter. We were talking about making film. It's almost like making a mixtape. You're working from cassette to cassette, and this felt very similar, but on SVHS. But it was really my first project ever. I'd wanted to make a film, and Steve was doing some performances, so we shot him live and then turned it into a documentary working around his live material.
And what were your roles on the picture, the two of you?
well, I came into it a little bit late, and I may have been out of town working elsewhere. I'm not sure, and I remember seeing all this footage, and Andres talking about it, and then he showed me a lot of the stuff he'd been shooting. So he'd been working on it for some time. And at some point, he showed me essentially a kind of a rough cut. And that's really when I got involved, because I saw he might have had a script to match it as well, but I saw the elements of what wanted to be this final film, but it was pretty rough. It was kind of strung together. And in fact, it was kind of what's often referred to as an assembly cut, where you literally just assemble the scenes in the sequence that they should appear in. And then we started talking about, well, how can we make the scenes more dynamic? And you actually had quite a good amount of material, so we figured out ways to start cutting, picking up the pace a little bit, cutting away to certain things, layer the sound a little bit, where one song might serve as the soundtrack for the next scene, and then come back out of it, and things like that. So that's really how I got involved. I didn't do any of the sound recording.
And this was all kind of dubbing from tape to tape.
Yeah, the old ways. Yeah.
Wow.
The first thing you do is I loved this. You lay down black, right? You basically make a black slate first. You had to
it's like the control track, I think they call it.
Control track. Yeah, exactly. So you had to put that down first, and then you start cutting on top of that. And if you make mistakes, you sort of have to go back and redo the black from a certain point.
Wow.
And I knew none of this. I mean, I had just decided I wanted to make a film and started shooting stuff. And as Mike said, I did kind of a very rough assembly. So I was very lucky to have Mike come on when he did. It's a blemish on his otherwise stellar film career, and I apologize to you, Michael, for that. And I apologize to Jimmy for making you watch it. And I believe our listeners, I'm going to apologize. I need to apologize to the listeners, too, but they can see it, right, on the YouTube channel, I believe, right?
You can. So it is now up. So, yeah, it's on our YouTube channel. If you go to the Two Real Cinema Club channel on YouTube, so it stands out because it's the first non-podcast content.
That's right.
On the channel.
Yeah.
So yeah, uploaded it a week or so ago. It's a blast. It's fantastic. Not only just to enjoy the upright guitar playing, and I think it's very clever. It's masterful the way that the kind of the mockumentary kind of slowly unfolds more details, and you start to learn a little bit more about Steve and the way that the underlying story is revealed. I think it's very skillful. It's a lot of fun to watch, and also for me, it gave me a very, very strong 90s nostalgia hit.
Yeah.
It was the music, the clothes, the hair. Mm-hmm. I had a friend also called Steve who had a haircut just like Steve's in the film, and it really brought those days back to me. Those kind of 90s heady kind of studenty days back to me, like very, very strongly. It made me feel a bit emotional. Actually, it was like going in a time machine. So great fun. Steve, brilliant guitarist. There is some great guitar playing.
Yeah.
And I think it's a skillful decision on the part of the people who made the film, I wonder who those guys are, to concentrate on the music and build the film around the music.
Yeah.
I don't know how many original songs there are. There's kind of some original songs and some covers, and it's probably, I would say, 12 songs at least.
Something like that.
You're kind of cutting in and out of these songs, and in part they illustrate the story, and in part they contrast with the story. It's all about the music, and the music is great. The playing is great, very enjoyable.
Yeah, so for listeners who haven't seen it yet, Steve has this peculiar way of playing his guitar. He has sort of just a regular acoustic guitar, but he plays it straight up almost like a cello. And he uses a lot of different tunings, and he's really just it's very percussive because he's sort of slapping at it to make the chords. And he's just a great writer, too. I really enjoy the song. So for me, my favorite part about it is just how it works as a document or a record of his playing in various clubs and him showcasing his music. And I think that's really the strength of the film. I did sort of, as Michael said, I sort of scripted it out a little bit. We did some interviews and a lot of obviously mock or very scripted interviews. So it was sort of loosely scripted, but I knew that we were going to be depending on the music to really keep it going. And again, I knew nothing. So when Michael was saying that I did an assembly cut of it first, at first I literally just wrote on scraps of paper. Jimmy's seen me do this sort of stuff too when we write together, where I had, I think 81 or 100, something like that, scraps of paper of the things that I had shot, and I just sort of put them together in my mind and then started just assembling them, but without a proper editor. And I'd seen some of Mike's editing from Temple and some of his films, and so it was just great to have him come in and actually teach me that stuff, show me how it was done, and just to have another brain on it, because I don't know if the assembly edit was a lot longer, and it gets down to about 57 minutes, but I think at one point we were hitting an hour and a half, and part of it was just I don't want to cut this bit of Steve playing this song because I love this song, and part of it was just because I had too much junk in there and it just needed to be cut by someone else. So that's kind of how it came together, and what I see its function as being really a record for Steve as well. But sadly, we do paint him in this other light. As you said, the story does come out slowly, and I think we did do a pretty good job with that. But that's all fictional.
There is this kind of slow reveal of a kind of cross-dressing Steve, and I was going to ask you, whether that comes from Steve or whether that was something that was completely invented for the film.
I'll answer that one quickly, and I think one thing that's not very clear is that a lot of the footage comes from this one. It was a women's singer-songwriter night of entertainment, and it was called "Where's Richard," which I thought was kind of clever. And I think we should have a shot of the poster in there at one point. And Stephen had asked to participate in that songwriters night, and he had proposed that he dress as a woman in order to do it. It's the one time he did it. He never did it other than that. So we built this whole film and this persona around that, but it only happened one night, and it was really I think it was the first night we recorded. that's how I decided to make that film. Is like, Steve's going to be performing cross-dressing. I'm going to get a camera, and I'm going to film it. And I was really unfamiliar with the camera, so there's a lot of weird stuff that happens. A lot of the effects, the visual effects, are really just me accidentally hitting a button and then taking 10, 20 awkward seconds to figure out how to unpress that button. And these are the old SVHS cameras, which were a little heavier, a little bigger, but they had all these little buttons that give you little effects. And so a lot of them, the things that I'm least proud of are the odd visual effects that were completely accidental. Some of them were intentional, but a lot of it was accidental.
But the funny thing is shooting it that way gives you the sense that they may have come from different performances. Sometimes you don't as a viewer, you don't piece it together like, oh, this is the same night. So it actually helps. It makes it seem like it was a longer process.
Yeah, it absolutely doesn't look like it's all from the same night. You're right. And also kind of some of the visual effects do give it a bit of it's like a sort of a retro nostalgic kind of 90s low budget pop video feel.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely what it was.
Yeah, and you can reproduce that by using the actual equipment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Last week, Mike, we were talking about recording using a Nagra recorder and things like that, and I remember you saying at the time, they were analog and clunky and large and heavy to carry around, but had a great sound and still perfectly functional. And I wonder whether, I'm guessing there must be some people working in the industry now, maybe somebody like Christopher Nolan, I don't know, who might choose to record on a Nagra because that's, the way that you're going to capture some of that kind of, 70s or 80s cinema feel.
It's funny you say that because I know specifically of two major films that perhaps you've seen, and they shall remain nameless, but both directors, two different very well-known Hollywood directors, were starting out a project, and they started off from the basis of really, really almost insisting, but really inquiring, what is the possibility of the sound mixer using a Nagra and recording on Nagra? We're going to shoot on film. Although the funny thing is one of them shot on film, the other one didn't. The other one shot in digital, but he still wanted it to be recorded on analog because it was a period piece. I don't want to give it away. It was a period piece, so he wanted it to sound old, and he thought that this would help contribute to that. And part of the politics of working in the film industry is you have to say yes to a lot of things until they slowly work themselves out until everyone comes around to an agreement that no, that's really not the best idea. But you play along for a little bit. And in the other case, on a project that I didn't work on, but a very good close friend of mine did, they took it quite far. They ended up shooting They did some test shooting, and some of which ended up as a music video for a famous pop group. And they did this with the Nagra. And so my friend had to go to do some research. They had to find a Nagra because they no longer owned their own Nagra. They used to, but they had sold it. So had to go find a Nagra and then find a company that still made the tape to use on a Nagra. And get it. And all there's a lot of. Anyways, they went to quite great lengths. And then ultimately, before the real filming began, it was decided, okay, that was a nice idea, but we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
The funny thing about from the visual standpoint, and this will come back to Debutante, which is if you shoot on film, which is an old technology, if you shoot on 35 millimeter or larger IMAX, say like Christopher Nolan shoots a lot in IMAX, you can shoot that and it looks incredible. And some still will say that's the standard for great visual. But if you're using inferior equipment such as an SVHS camera, when you watch it now, that also helps you feel like you're in the 90s. It looks like from the 90s.
Yeah.
And it does not at all, you couldn't use it today and feel like, oh, I can make something that's going to really be great with this piece of equipment. Whereas you could record with an Nagra and it would be fantastic. It's just it's impractical but quality wise, it would be, still be at a very high level.
What was that David Lynch film that was done with video cameras? Inland Empire, which I never saw, but I think that was all shot with, like cheap little handheld camcorders.
Yeah.
So I think it is still a potential artistic decision.
Yes. Yeah, it can be. There was someone, you remember there was a little, what was the toy camera that came out? I think it was made by Mattel. It was like Pixel Vision or something like that. And I remember seeing some super low res, and that was kind of cool, and it created a very particular look, which can be cool if that's, but you're stuck with that look.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't fix it in post.
Yeah.
Andres, when you shot Stephen's scenes when he was playing live, were you using the microphone in the camera, or were you recording the sound separately? Do you remember?
I do remember. Those I liked the old cameras in the sense that they were bigger and heavier, so you really felt like you didn't necessarily need a tripod if you had your shoulder, because they were so big that they weren't going to move around a lot without you moving it. But I was tethered at times to a soundboard, so on a couple of the gigs I was able to get a line out from the soundboard, which was capturing his audio, and then it was reduced to, I guess, what is called an earphone plug or an earphone jack on the old cameras. So you could get it right into the camera. I think for a couple, we used what was the onboard camera, the onboard microphone, which they weren't bad microphones, but they weren't great. So I was very lucky. I think most of the gigs we had sound from the soundboard, which worked well. Otherwise, I would say, boy, if you're these guys who are struggling to reproduce bad sound from the earlier days, I did it. I can do it. I could do that today. I could create bad sound today. So, but I think we lucked out. It's mostly decent sound. For some of the interviews and such, we had either lavalier mics, or even a table mic here and there. So I never really trusted the onboard mics, just because it depended on where the camera person was or where I was holding the camera. They didn't have that kind of range or that kind of directional function or dynamism. So usually it was straight out of the board or some sort of table mic or lavalier. So it came off pretty well. Michael, and I need to make this clear, he did not work on the sound at all until the editing stage. So if you're thinking, boy, that sound on that film sucks, how did that guy make a career out of it in the industry? No, he did not really record any sound that I recall on this project. He is in the film, though. He's the heckler.
Oh, wait a second.
And it's funny, I had forgotten that until you mentioned it. And then I was like, yeah, that was the one.
And it ended up being this mirror shot, because we wanted to capture a heckler in the audience as well as Steve performing and being heckled. So it was a little bit elaborate. We had to set it up so that Mike was standing up and heckling him while catching his image in the mirror, and then filming Steve as he was tuning. It was wonderful, because Steve does spend a lot of time. This is probably why he doesn't gig anymore. He spent so much time tuning that you probably heard as much tuning as you did songs if you caught him live. So we heckled him on his tuning, and he was very good-natured about it. But that was a set-up scene. He was just doing a gig somewhere that night, and I don't think that was very impromptu, so I don't think we had great sound, for example. But he does play a pretty nice song. I think it's Art in America is that song. And so we did capture that as well. But we all appear in the film. I'm actually in the film very briefly playing bongos. Steve and I were in a polka band, bongo polka band. And so I'm in the film as well. So all three of us are in the film, which also makes it just kind of a nice memory in our voices. The thing about, for me, I hear my voice a lot because I'm doing interviews and asking him questions, and I just feel like my voice is so much younger then. So it is nostalgic. It's also sad. An old voice.
Nostalgia is fundamentally a sad emotion, isn't it? I think.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's always tinged with a little bit of sadness, for sure.
Yeah, if you're looking back purely with joy, then it's not nostalgia anymore, is it? It's just a happy memory.
But I mean, the thing about that film is that it was a great project. I was working with two great friends on both music and film at the same time. I was late 20s. I turned 30 when we finished this film, and my goal was to sort of, one of my secret goals, make a film before 30.
Hey.
Did that, and we got it done. And I just think back on it fondly, and I do have this one memory also, though, how much I was really depending on my friends, in the sense that I had bronchitis towards the end of this. We were trying to get it ready for my 30th birthday. We had we had the Dairy Center for the Arts where Steve and I were working. We had it booked. We were going to make it into like a little theater that night. I had bronchitis. I was so sick. And Prim was just back in the studio. He was just in the editing bays at Community Access Television in Boulder, Colorado, and he just kept cranking it out. And it's like I didn't have to worry about it. I could just sit there and cough and throw up and just be lazy for a couple of days while the film was just being taken care of. So it was just nice to have trusted hands where I could say, he knows the vision. He's fully invested now. He can do it, and I can just check it out later.
It was funny. In some ways for me, it was kind of like being back at university because shooting on SVHS with the big old tape decks, editing, that was the stuff we had.
Yeah.
And so back, working with that stuff again was fun.
Yeah, and it is sort of it's a record of a certain period in time. I spent 6 months on it, maybe 7 months on it. And it's just it's nostalgic in that way, and I think that is a good memory. I loved making the film; it was fun. I loved just doing interviews with Steve and other people, and just going to his concerts and capturing it on tape. That was great.
Then what happened to the film after you'd finished it?
It aired on the Access station, so the very station that was providing me with gear and gave us the editing studios. It aired for a long time. I mean, it became this sort of underground thing, and late at night it would come on, and Steve would, occasionally people would say, "Hey, Steve, I saw you on TV. Were you wearing a dress and playing music?" So you'd have these people staying up late at night watching it or coming on, and it ran for a long time just because they didn't have a lot of that kind of material. They, the public access scene is sort of these local talk shows or these sort of niche hobbies that people put up on screen and no one watches. So to have something that was a little bit different at that time, I think made it kind of popular. I went the festival route a little bit, so that's the days when you're literally making copies. I think I had one DVD master, and I would make VHS copies, and you'd send them off to festivals, paying lots of postage, buying lots of packing materials and all that, and writing letters. It was the old days. And a couple places did pick it up, but there was a small video club in Boston that really gave me some nice feedback. They really enjoyed, they had a good laugh out of it. But obviously didn't place in any festivals or anything like that. But it spread out a little bit. But it did play probably a year or so on public access in Boulder just because they didn't have much to play.
You are too modest. Played for a year because it was
filler.
good.
It was filler.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, no, that's the sad thing is it wasn't the filler. The filler was around it.
It was the main event. You were the headliner for a year. Mike, after doing Debutante, have you done much editing on other people's projects since?
No, it's funny you should say. I haven't really done much editing at all since then. I just started into my sound career and kind of followed that. So I haven't done any professionally. Now, I've made a couple of little short films after a number of years had passed, 10 or more years, and then I decided, for instance, one, I made a little short film with my son when he was younger, and I found it's about him going out and taking a canoe out for a ride in the river near our old house, and I found the experience quite enjoyable, and I kept thinking, this is actually kind of fun. I like doing this. I get why editors like to edit. I started to really enjoy it, but it kind of ties back to, I was telling you in a previous conversation about why I didn't go into music. Music recording is because I didn't want to work on stuff I didn't like. And I think part of that is it's hard to sum up the motivation to do it. And
I
think I would feel that way with editing if I with making my little short film, but also with making Debutante. It was something that I was really engaged in on a personal level.
Yeah. So
then I felt really, fully engrossed in the experience. And once I got into it, that's when you experience those days where I've been sitting in front of this screen for 10 hours editing, but screw dinner. I want to keep going because I want to finish this scene.
Yeah.
You get this this internal drive, which is can be detrimental to your health, but it's certainly, it's nice to your personal, to your life to have those moments where you're feeling some sort of passion about something.
I agree. It's just great to indulge that creative urge and be inspired like that. Even if the material's not great necessarily, or it's not going to age well, just having a project like that is fun. And I have seen Michael's shorter films, and they're beautiful. I mean, they're much better now that you can work on a digital camera and get better sound and such. But
are they available online, Mike?
Only for a select few. Although, no, the film I was referring to about with my son, I submitted that to a couple of little festivals, and the only one it got into was here in my hometown of Albany, California. We have this little hometown film festival, and they get a few films from elsewhere that come in, but they also, my film was featured in the locals section.
Oh, nice.
So it got one day where it screened on the big screen in the movie theater, along with a handful of other films, and that was nice.
Well, I imagine the Two Real Cinema crowd is going to probably start clamoring for that, so we might have to post it with your permission or without. We've used your music without your permission before, so. The
funny thing is I'd be happy to give you my permission. It's whether or not my son is too keen on it.
Now he's younger.
Now that he's a teenager and he looks back on those younger years, he gets really concerned about how he looks. And
Dad,
he looks like a cute little rascal. Anyways, I'm sure we can work something out when we negotiate the fees for the music that you're using. I'm sure we can.
No. We never should have mentioned that.
I remember you're probably at kind of like a similar stage, making some short comedy films with some friends. This would have been kind of late 90s, early 2000s, and sending them around to festivals. And that whole scene kind of doesn't exist anymore, I guess, as far as I'm aware, at least. I mean, here in the UK, I think the notion of a short film festival has sort of been murdered by YouTube, which is a 24-hour-a-day international short film festival. On this notion of leaving the house and going somewhere to watch a bunch of short films that have been curated by a stranger, I don't think that's something that exists anymore. At the time, I remember when I was going to a lot of these little short film festivals and hoping to get something in, and you do your best and you kind of want to see what other people are doing and try and make some connections. And I remember at the time, most of the short films that I used to watch, they used to fall into one of three categories. They would either be, like a short 7-minute film made by, some sort of 20 or 30 something people in an apartment, and which is obviously the apartment of one of them, and it would be involving people coming in and going out of rooms in an apartment, and it was another apartment film. Or there was kind of something very experimental that didn't make any sense and seemed to have no narrative and was full of lots of shaky cam. And there were ones that were good. And there was these were the three categories, and it was always such a relief when you'd see a film which wasn't one of the bad ones. Yeah. Oh, at last, a good one, not one shot in somebody's apartment, or not one where they can't keep the camera still.
Yeah.
But the whole thing, I guess, doesn't really exist anymore, does it? It's all gone online.
Well, I think
it has gone away.
I think that there's little pockets. It's not as prevalent, perhaps, as it was, but there's still little things. I see things like in my area, there's groups I see on Facebook who have short filmmaking weekends where they have a challenge to make a film over the course of one weekend and then share the results.
Cute.
But as far as the festivals, those are even a little bit harder.
Oh, yeah.
The word weekend always, we were talking about this the other week, always makes me think of Paul Schrader boasting that he wrote the script of Taxi Driver in a weekend. I'm hoping that your Facebook friends who make a weekend film basically make Taxi Driver. Is that right? Do they make a violent 90-minute film about
that's the goal,
about a would-be presidential assassin?
Yeah, that's. I think that's the goal that they're aiming for. Yeah, I don't know if it's achieved, but it's it's attempted.
Yeah, I think it's more important for me. Just make it, and I think in Debutante we've set the bar very low, which is great. You just, for future filmmakers, just make a damn film, have some fun, because you will remember doing it, and it was a great experience. And I think that's it. I like those festivals. It's a 48-hour film. You're supposed to write a script. Most people come with something kind of already prepared, and then you just shoot it and you make it. And I think that is a great model. I've never done it. I've seen it happen. I've been in towns where it was happening, but I like the model.
I know I asked a similar question earlier, but if you could open the time portal and step back 25 years and talk to yourselves 25 years ago making Debutante, what would your message from the future be? Would it be make sure you capitalize on this, or enjoy it while it lasts, or make sure you charm the open access people?
My message would be there's a big pile of crappy films out there. Make sure your crappy film gets in there too. That's it. Just do it. It's fun.
Put it on the pile.
And you'll learn from it. I think that's the other thing is I learned so much about writing and editing and camera work and everything just on that film, and I wouldn't have made it if I hadn't made the first crappy film. So I said, just do it. Just do it. Yeah.
I mean, the thing that really stands out to me is that, here's some young people getting a bit of equipment and making a film, and the film is an hour long. Whereas, currently short form video means that, you're a filmmaker if you make a 40-second film on TikTok.
Yeah.
And, I don't know whether there is the capacity for making, these longer form, low budget films. I feel like, if something does end up on YouTube, it's only a hit if it's under 6 minutes. And having the ambition and the sheer mental coordination to gather a story together over a whole hour, I think is a complete, a different level of achievement.
It's true.
I was going to say, speaking of reaching certain levels of achievement and time limits, I think we got to get in to see this movie.
You're right. We should. You're right.
We've been waiting at the popcorn counter for weeks now.
See, I've been queuing for popcorn all this time, not realizing that Mike's got it all stuffed in his pockets.
Oh yeah.
I should have.
I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go and having a hard time not eating it while we're standing here.
Right. To the screening.
All right, guys.